Good morning. My name is Jon Saunders, and I am one of the pastors at Redeemer Presbyterian Church in downtown Detroit. I know your pastor quite well, Jimmy, from our days at Calvin Theological Seminary. Jimmy is a good man. He loves the Lord. He's a good, faithful pastor, and so I know you all are very blessed by his leadership, especially during this coronavirus season that we are going through. And so thankful that he is your pastor. Praying for your church. Jimmy's idea of just bringing in some seminary buddies to bring a word to you all is a wonderful idea. And so I do send greetings from Motown, from the Motor City. We know that New York is being hit hard by this virus, and Detroit is just now starting to get hard. And so on some level, I understand just the confusion and the uneasiness that the situation is creating. This was our sermon text from this past week, and so I just thought maybe for a few minutes we could look at it. This is from Mark chapter 6, starting in verse 45. It reads, "Immediately he is Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, 'Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid.' And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened." This is a well-known story. I'm sure many of you have heard it many, many times. The story, the context is taking place after the feeding of the 5,000. At this point, Jesus is getting quite popular. All Jesus wants to do is pray. And so he sends his disciples out into the boat to get to the other side of the lake. The disciples will sort of prepare the way for when Jesus comes the next day. Jesus stays behind. He's going to pray. But in the middle of the night, a great storm comes up on the lake. The disciples are understandably very afraid. They are stuck in the middle of a big lake in a little handmade wooden boat, and so they are afraid. And then Jesus miraculously walks out to them and calms the storm, and all is well. Now, I was very surprised when I started to study this text a little bit, just how much is actually here. This is more than a sermon's worth of exegetical work when you really dive into it, but just a few observations that give us a little bit of a hint of just who the power of Jesus is and what he is accomplishing here. So a few observations. Number one, we see that Jesus walks on water. That'd be point number one. Number two, we see that Jesus, it's in verse 48, Jesus meant to pass them by. That's a really odd statement. Jesus is leaving the shore, he's walking on water, and he means to pass by the boat. So just remember that is odd. Number three, in verse 50, Jesus says, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And the final observation is that when Jesus talks, the wind and the waves all cease. Now, when you pile all those together, what we see is that Jesus is actually God. From the Old Testament, we see in the Psalms that God is the one who walks on water. That phrase that Jesus meant to pass by, it's the exact same phrase. When God passed by Moses was hid in the cleft of the rock, and God in all his glory passed by, and all Moses could see was the back of God. And then in verse 50, when Jesus says, "Take heart, it is I," that phrase, "it is I," is the same phrase that Jesus uses in John chapter 8. In Greek, it is ego eimi, and that is the Greek way of saying the Hebrew name of God, I am. It's the same phrase that God used when he appeared to Moses in the burning bush. "By what shall we call you, God?" And God said to Moses, "I am." So Jesus is the I am. And then the final observation is that Jesus is able to calm the wind and the storm. Again, these are things that only God can do. We see this in the Psalms. So you piece all that together, Jesus is actually God. He is not just a prophet. He is not just a teacher. He is not just a good man. Jesus is God in the flesh, 100%, fully God in every single way. He can walk on water. He can calm a storm. He is the I am, and he meant to pass by like God meant to pass by Moses 2,000 years before. This is all happening in the middle of a storm. Whenever you think of stormy water in the Bible, you know that stormy waters always separate people from God, from his peace. Think of the flood. Think of the people crossing the stormy Jordan River in the book of Joshua. So again, Jesus is doing all this in the middle of a storm. This is chaos. This is separation. This is distance from God. And so Jesus enters into the distance from God as God himself. And he says, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Jesus has the power to give us peace in the storms of life because he is God himself. Think of even just in redemptive history how this is all happening. In the Old Testament, God meant to pass Moses by as the I am. But now, in the New Covenant, in Jesus Christ, the I am does not actually pass by, but he sits down with his friends in the boat. So God has always been near to his people, but now in Jesus Christ, he is especially near. Even in these stormy waters of the coronavirus, when the economy is not doing well, when there's so much uncertainty in the world, we can take comfort knowing that the great God I am comes to us, and he does not pass us by, but he actually sits down in the boat with us. And so perhaps that is a word of encouragement to you. Again, thankful for your church and what you all are doing out east, praying that you will be salt and light during this very difficult time. And I'm certainly praying for your pastor and my good friend, Jimmy. And so love you all, and God bless you.